Welcome to my podcast for medieval travelers. Over the next several minutes, we will learn about ancient Viking warriors, how they fought, and the weapons they used. The Vikings were not the simple barbaric raiders that the media often portrays them to be. These explorers journeyed far and wide, not only in search of plunder, but also for trade. After 300 years of Viking activity, these Norsemen had gone as far east as Kiev, as far south as Constantinople, and as far west as modern-day America. To start our analysis of Vikings, we will look at two historical sources. First, a Viking sword, and second, the account of a Viking attack on the Muslim town of Seville in Al-Andalus. The Viking sword was no simple weapon of war. This was a status symbol for a Dane to show their wealth and prestige. Not all Vikings could afford a sword, and so, to carry one, and even much more impressive, to be buried with one, was an incredible mark of power and influence. For a Viking raider, one of the most coveted swords that could be acquired was a sword that bore the Ulfberth mark of quality, and was made in France from the 800s all the way through the 1100s. France attempted to keep these weapons out of Viking hands by banning their export, which had the unintended consequence of France's neighbors copying the Ulfberth mark and selling off lower quality swords. Viking raiders were a plague not only for Franks that unwittingly sold them swords, but also for the Muslims of the Iberian Peninsula known as Al-Andalus. A small team of researchers, on a quest to better understand the makeup and use of Viking swords, did a neutron diffraction study on 3 separate swords in the National Museum of Denmark. Neutron diffraction is a process that allowed these researchers to analyze the composition and manufacturing processes involved in the development of all 3 swords. Swords of the Viking Age were expensive heirlooms that elites often passed from father to son. Most of these blades were pattern welded, which was a process of warping, bending, and hammering multiple rods of irons into a sword that shows a unique pattern. This method may have been sought after for many different reasons, but the core of these reasons was that it made a very beautiful weapon. The analysis of these weapons shows that they were well refined for their time. The pattern welding of the most damaged of the 3 swords indicates that it was not a very quality weapon, and the pattern welding was much more for decoration than anything practical. This type of find confirms the idea of a Viking sword as more of a symbol of elite status than as a weapon. The Norseman Leo was the core unit of Viking warbands. These Leo are the iconic group of Viking warriors under a small village leader. Many Leo would then come together to form the larger Viking warbands, like the one that attacked Seville. A team of lead researchers in human anthropological evolution and archaeology came together to analyze these Viking Leo and how they formed and operated. This team argues that one of the essential factors to the makeup of the Leo was in-group identification. This is the idea that a social group can be identified by a set of traits shared by everyone in the group. In the case of the Leo, the trait is very simple. To be in a Leo, a person had to be able to fight. Evidence suggests that the Leo transcended normal social constructs like class and even gender. The team's next essential factor is what brings the Leo together and solidifies it as a distinct group. For an in-group that goes through harsh and traumatic experiences together, relationships between members become very strong, much like familial bonds. This process is called identity fusion, and it solidifies each member of the Leo as a loyal member of the group. These 2 factors are easily observable even in today's modern armies. Members develop a sense of trust, brotherhood, and loyalty to their small squad group. In the year 844, Viking raiders launched an attack on the Muslim town of Seville in Al-Andalus. This attack was more than just a few Norsemen looking for the plunder of coastal villages. The Norsemen brought an entire fleet of warships to southern Europe. Somewhere between 80 and 100 ships came to rob Seville of its wealth. From beginning to end, this raid lasted around 3 months and saw the raiders plunder their way to Seville, which is not a coastal town. Much like Paris, Seville was certainly not expecting raiders from the sea to journey upriver and strike their city. The success of Viking warbands seems to have relied as heavily on their fearsome reputation and unconventional tactics as it did their prowess in battle. The raiders would soon learn that they made a mistake by lingering in Seville, though. The Muslim emir's call to arms brought heavy forces to bear upon the Vikings, and many of them were captured or killed. Perhaps this Viking fleet wanted to establish a new foothold in Seville and overplayed their hand. Regardless, the Muslim accounts of this raid certainly believed that God was ultimately on their side as he brought them victory against the Norsemen. Vikings were the farthest journeying group of Europeans until the end of the 15th century, with the expansion into the New World. However, Norsemen didn't all go Viking. Many of these people were traders, explorers, and settlers. Their long arms went west to Vinland, south to Al-Andalus, and east to Constantinople and Kiev. Though many of the journeys of the Leo were in search of new lands to pillage and plunder, the Norse cannot be looked at only through the lens of the Viking.